what's the old saying? Physician, heal thyself.
Benzodiazepines are a class of medications typically used to treat anxiety and insomnia. They include things like Xanax, Valium, Klonopin.
When we went back to Toronto, our family physician prescribed benzodiazepines.
One of the fascinating things about benzodiazepines in the past, let's say 20 years, is that there's been a steady increase in prescribing. In fact, since about 1999, benzodiazepine prescriptions have increased about 67%.
And something called Zopiclone, Imovane. And I hardly took the Imovane at all, maybe 4 or 5 times. But I took the benzodiazepine the way that it was prescribed, twice a day, 0.25 milligrams. And that seemed to bring the symptoms to a pretty rapid halt, which is also part of the reason I didn't need the Imovane. And then there were so many other things going on around me at that time that I never really thought about it again.
There's also been a 7-fold increase in benzodiazepine-related mortality since 1999. And so what I've written about is that I really think that benzodiazepines are like the hidden epidemic. There's been all this national attention and awareness around opioids and how they can cause death and all kinds of other adverse health outcomes, including addiction. But we read very little about benzodiazepines and the fact that they are highly addictive, that they can cause death, that they cause all kinds of other adverse health outcomes.
I developed symptoms that I now recognized were associated with its use. Weakness on my left side and like a feeling of detachment from people around me, people I loved, some decrease in the ability to experience joy. But it wasn't until much later that I actually associated with benzodiazepine use.
Now, the first drug that was tested in this new era was Xanax, alprazolam, for panic disorder, okay? And here was the study they conducted. They had it was for panic attacks. It was Xanax versus a placebo group. And after 4 weeks, Xanax was doing better, okay? But it wasn't a 4-week study.
The way that physicians typically prescribe benzodiazepines to patients is contrary to how they are recommended to be prescribed by the FDA. Almost all benzodiazepines are recommended to be used only short term. Now, how we define short term is sort of in the eyes of the beholder. But generally, when we're thinking short term, we're thinking, on the order of days to weeks, not months to years.
At 8 weeks, the alprazolam patients were doing no better than placebo patients, okay? And then from 8 weeks to 14 weeks was when you withdrew the drug, because we knew benzodiazepines were addictive, so they had to have a withdrawal phase. At the end of 14 weeks, the Xanax patients were doing worse than they were at the beginning, and much, much worse than the placebo patients, okay? The trial told of harm done. It told of people who were going to get addicted. When they came off, they'd have all sorts of withdrawal symptoms, and some people unable to get off.
And yet we commonly see in the medical profession physicians who prescribe benzodiazepines to patients as a sort of one-way ticket. They start the prescription, the patient starts taking it, the patient endorses that they feel better, and 20 years later, they're still on that benzodiazepine, and often at a higher dose.
So I asked my doctor to increase the benzodiazepine dose, but what seemed to happen as a consequence of that was that I just got more anxious. So again, in retrospect, it seems like I had a rather uncommon but not unheard of reaction to benzodiazepines where increased dose makes anxiety worse instead of better. So then at one point when things weren't getting better and Tammy was still in the hospital and I was trying to take care of her, we had lots of help, I stopped taking them entirely and tried ketamine, which is a treatment for depression. Well, neither of those were a very good idea as it turned out.
What did they report? What did American Psychiatry report? They didn't report the 8-week results. They focused on the 4-week results because that was a story that told of an effective new treatment for panic disorder. They basically glided over, didn't talk about the 8-week results in the abstracts and completely hid the 14-week results. So what's the evidence base? These are effective for panic disorder.
But I continued my sort of downhill spiral and ended up in a clinic on the Eastern Seaboard that claimed they could do a rapid benzodiazepine detox, which was a complete bloody lie.
Yeah. Well, what we figured was we didn't realize that there was this physical dependency until you stopped to try and do the ketamine. And then we tried tapering and you couldn't stand it because of the akathisia. And so we thought, well, let's go get some professional help.
Right. And I went to the clinic on the understanding that they could do a multi-day detoxification and treatment for withdrawal. And when I got there, what they told me instead was that they'd substitute one benzodiazepine for another, which wasn't the least bit helpful because clonazepam was already a long-acting benzodiazepine, and they're easier to wean off than the shorter-acting benzodiazepines. And they had nothing to offer, essentially. I came out of that clinic worse than when I went in. So,
like significantly worse.
Yes.
On 2 more sedative-like drugs in order to dampen down the akathisic symptoms.
Right, which wasn't helping much.
There is a body of literature now that shows that these drugs do leave lasting, for many, many people, leave lasting cognitive deficits. No, I'm thinking of a study where people would, the study I was going to talk about, where the people were using multiple drugs over the years, benzos, and some people were using opiates, and some people were using stimulants. And the loss of brain function was the greatest in the people using the benzos, especially compared to people using the opiates.
You and Andre, your husband, took me out of that hospital, and we went to Russia, of all places, near Moscow, to try a treatment offered by a clinic there that used...
They used propofol and Dextor.
Right. Propofol as a heavy sedating agent, which basically made me unconscious for 9 days. And it's so strange because we're now in Serbia, weirdly enough, in Belgrade of all bloody places. And we've been here about 2 weeks and went to yet another specialty clinic run by an anesthesiologist. And they modified the medication that I was taking in Florida, which is where we were last. And I don't know, I can't understand it, but virtually all my symptoms have disappeared.
For someone who's not taken benzos, I would go to great lengths to convince them never to do it. It's not a good idea. It can affect performance in school, on the job. It's devastating in terms of driving. People can be as impaired with benzos driving as they would be with alcohol. So all of the side effects that you associate with alcohol in young people can also occur with benzos. And the combination of the two is additive.
What's the old saying? Physician, heal thyself.
Dun, 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 dun.